My name is Sister Beatrice. I am 76 years old. And this is the first time I have spoken openly about what really happened behind the walls of St. Aurelia's convent. For 40 years, I said nothing. Not because I lacked the words, not because I forgot, but because I knew, deep in the hollows of my soul, that if I ever said it out loud, the truth might destroy what little remained of my faith in humanity. But silence is a kind of death, too. Most people believe we lived quiet, prayerful lives up on that mountain. They see the photographs of us, smiling, kneeling, hands folded in devotion, and they think, what a beautiful life those women must have lived. That's the story the church preferred, the one they wrapped in white linen and pressed between pages of scripture. But we were not saints, and we were not safe. The things I saw inside that convent, the things done to us by men who claimed to serve God, have haunted every breath of my life since the day I entered at 16. I have buried 5 sisters. I have lived through fires, cover-ups, threats. I have watched innocence be extinguished like candle flames and heard the screams no one was supposed to hear. I kept journals I was too afraid to sign. I learned how to smile through trauma and say amen with blood still drying beneath my fingernails. And I stayed silent. Until now. If you are listening to this, I need you to believe something they tried to make me forget. We were good women, we were faithful, we were loyal, and we were betrayed. Betrayed by a man who wore a collar, betrayed by those who knew and turned away, betrayed by a church that told us suffering was our sanctification. But this story is not just about pain, it's about resistance, about what it means to survive in a world where silence is currency and obedience is weaponized. It's about a place called St. Aurelia's and the secrets it tried to bury. And it's about a vow I made, not to stay silent, but to one day speak, to one day tell the truth. That day has come, so sit with me, listen carefully, because the shadows that lived inside that convent still echo through every brick, and I am ready, after 4 long decades, to drag them into the light. I was 16 the day I arrived at St. Aurelia's. It was late autumn, and the leaves had already turned to fire, orange, red, gold, like the world itself was burning in quiet preparation for winter. My mother wept at the gates. My father said nothing. He never did. I think, in his way, he believed he was delivering me to something holy, something untouched by the rot of the world. The convent stood atop a hill like a sleeping castle, grey stone walls, Gothic arches, a bell tower that rang every morning at 5 and echoed for miles through the Vermont countryside. I remember thinking it looked like the safest place on earth. I remember being wrong. St. Aurelia's was run by the Order of the Sacred Thorn, a small cloister of women committed to silence, work, and devotion. There were only 7 sisters when I arrived, each with a quiet authority that made me feel like a child in their presence. They moved with purpose, praying, cleaning, cooking, teaching catechism to the village girls below. Their lives were orderly, peaceful, predictable. Or so I thought. Mother Clémence was the superior then. Tall, wiry, strict, but not unkind. She told me I had a face that hadn't yet seen the world's teeth, and placed me in the care of Sister Lucy, a tender woman with soft eyes and a voice like warm milk. Lucy taught me everything: when to bow, how to pray, where to scrub the floors, and how to kneel without letting the bones scream. The days were full. The nights were quiet. My body ached, but my soul was steady. I believed I had found the life I was meant for. Every morning, We would wake before dawn, pray, break our fast, tend to the gardens, the kitchens, the chapel. In the evenings, we'd gather for vespers, our voices rising in sacred rhythm beneath the stained glass windows. There was peace in the routine, and for the first year, that peace wrapped around me like a woolen shawl. I slept deeply. I dreamed often. I had no idea the ground was already shifting beneath our feet. It's strange how evil never arrives in thunder. It comes quietly. Whispers before footsteps. Shadows before storms. If I had known what was coming, I might have left before the gates locked behind me. But I didn't know. I was 16. I was full of faith. And I believed in the goodness of the church. I believed that St. Aurelia's was a sanctuary. I had no idea it would become a prison. He arrived in late spring. The birds had returned, the garden was blooming, and the convent had just finished preparing for the feast of the Ascension. I remember the first time I saw him, Father Damien. He stood at the gates with a suitcase in one hand and a leather-bound Bible in the other. Tall, clean-shaven, early 30s maybe. He smiled like someone who already knew he belonged. The bishop had sent him after Father Anselm, our long-time chaplain, passed away in his sleep. Father Anselm was old, gentle, quiet. He used to fall asleep mid-sermon, and once told me God didn't mind if I prayed in my head when I scrubbed floors. He had been with the convent for decades, a constant. Damien was no Anselm. From the start, there was something off about him, something I couldn't name then, but would later come to recognize as hunger, a hunger for power, for control, for something darker than I could comprehend at the time. He called me Sister Beatrice, but lingered on the sister, like it amused him. Mother Clémence introduced him to us during morning assembly. Father Damien has been appointed to oversee our spiritual care, she announced. He will be leading confession, mass, and providing pastoral guidance moving forward. He nodded politely, said a few humble words about his mission to serve, and then looked each of us in the eye. Not quickly, not politely, one by one, like he was choosing something. Later that afternoon, I found Sister Lucy in the kitchen. She was scrubbing pots so hard her knuckles were raw. I asked if something was wrong. She said nothing, but I saw the way her hands trembled. The first few weeks passed without incident, at least publicly. He said the right things, gave moving sermons, spoke of humility and obedience. The villagers adored him. Young women lingered after Mass, hanging on his words. But inside the convent, a shift had begun. It was subtle at first, a longer than necessary hand on the shoulder during confession, questions that strayed from the soul to the body. His eyes always watched, even when he pretended not to. Then came the rules. New rules. He said our skirts were too short beneath our habits, that certain books in the library encouraged pride, that the older sisters had grown lax in their discipline. He began issuing penances that lasted hours, encouraging us to confess deeper, to surrender more. And we did, because he was a priest, because we were women, because obedience was not just a virtue at St. Aurelia's, it was survival. One evening, after I had stayed late to clean the sacristy, I turned and found him standing behind me. He said nothing at first, just watched. Then he said, "You have a stillness in you, Sister Beatrice." I like that. It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a claim. It was Sister Therese who warned me first, not with words, but with silence. We were tending to the herb garden that afternoon, pruning the rosemary and checking for beetles in the basil. The sun was high, and the convent walls threw long shadows over the stone paths. She moved slowly, methodically, like someone with far too much on her mind. Beatrice, she said quietly, her eyes never lifting from the soil. If Father Damien ever asks you to meet him alone, don't. I stopped trimming. My hands froze mid-air. I looked at her, waiting for more. But that was all she offered. She bent lower, yanked a weed, and said nothing else. Sister Therese had always been devout, obedient to a fault. The idea that she would speak out, even in that subtle way, chilled me. Something had shifted, something deep, something dangerous. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice what I hadn't before. Sister Lucy avoided confession entirely. She claimed illness, a chronic cough. But her eyes said otherwise. They never met mine, and she never entered the chapel unless someone else went with her. Sister Magdalena, once spirited and sharp, now flinched at sudden noises. Her once booming voice in morning chants became barely a whisper. I caught her staring blankly at the crucifix more than once, her lips moving without sound. One night, I overheard muffled crying through the convent walls, software suppressed. Not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that begs not to be heard. The whispers began soon after. In the garden, in the linen room, in the hallway outside the chapel. Did you see the bruises on Sister Clara's wrists? Lucy said she blacked out after confession. Father Damien said it was punishment for temptation. And then the worst whisper of all. It's better if we don't ask questions. Obedience, silence, penance. That was the rhythm now. That was the rule. The atmosphere in the convent turned thick, oppressive, like breathing through soaked wool. Mass became ritualistic theatre, and Father Damien stood at the altar like a king in vestments, delivering sermons about submission and sacrifice. His voice echoed through the pews like judgment itself. One morning, I found Sister Therese kneeling in the garden long before sunrise, still in her nightgown, hands buried in the dirt like she was trying to disappear into the earth. She looked up at me, eyes rimmed with tears. I prayed to God for a sign, she whispered. But maybe God doesn't come here anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep, because deep down, I was beginning to think she might be right. She was the oldest among us. Sister Agnes, 81 years old, with paper-thin skin and a spine that bent like a question mark. But her mind was sharp. Too sharp, perhaps, for her own safety. Agnes had been at St. Aurelia's longer than any of us. She knew the foundations, the archives, the hidden keys tucked behind chapel bricks. She once joked that she'd buried more secrets than she had fellow sisters, and that was saying something. And then, one Monday morning, she was gone. No warning, no goodbye, just an empty bed and folded nightgown resting neatly on her pillow. Mother Clémence made the announcement during breakfast. Her hands trembled as she held the cup of weak tea. Sister Agnes passed peacefully in her sleep last night, she said. We will hold a private ceremony. The diocese has requested discretion. Discretion. That word again. It had become as common as amen. We weren't allowed to see her body. Too fragile, they said. We weren't allowed to enter her room. Being prepared for the next novice. We weren't even allowed to pray by her bedside. Something was wrong. That evening, when the others were in chapel, I slipped away. I told myself it was foolish curiosity, that I just needed to feel close to her one last time. But deep down, I knew I was searching for something else. The hallway outside Agnes's quarters was unlit. The door was locked. I knelt down, pulled a thin wire from my sleeve, a trick Sister Helena once taught me, and jimmied the lock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. Inside, everything was immaculate. Too immaculate. No signs of life, no comb on the table, no slippers by the bed, no scent of lavender, which she used to dab behind her ears every morning. But there, beneath the floorboards near her nightstand, I found something she must have hidden. A rosary, not just any rosary. Her rosary. Silver chain, wooden beads. The crucifix chipped on the left side from when it fell in the garden years ago. It was wrapped in cloth, blood-stained cloth. I didn't scream. I didn't gasp. I just stood there, holding it in both hands, while a single thought pierced through my mind like lightning. She didn't die peacefully, and I think she knew they were coming. Later that night, I returned to the garden where Sister Therese had first whispered her warning. I buried the cloth beneath the roots of the rosemary bush. I said no prayers, not because I didn't believe in God, but because I was beginning to believe that God had stopped listening to this place a long time ago. The morning after Sister Agnes died, I approached Mother Clémence with the rosary still burning a hole in my memory. My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. "I don't believe she died peacefully," I said. "Something's wrong." Mother Clémence didn't look up from her papers. "What are you implying, Sister Beatrice?" I hesitated. "I think someone hurt her." That got her attention. She looked at me sharply, as if I'd spoken blasphemy. And perhaps in her eyes, I had. She stood slowly, smoothing the front of her habit with deliberate care. "You will pray," she said. "You will ask God for forgiveness for the poison you've allowed to grow in your heart." I tried again, softer this time. "Mother, I'm frightened." "Then be obedient," she snapped. "Obedience is the path to peace." That afternoon, I was reassigned. No more scribing in the library. No more garden duty beside Sister Therese or Lucy. Instead, I was sent to the cellar. "Inventory," they said. "The archives are disorganized. Perhaps solitude will help you refocus." It wasn't punishment, not officially, but everyone knew what it meant. You were being watched. You were being quieted. The cellar was cold and smelled of mildew and ink. Dust floated through the air like old confessions. I sorted boxes of records, sacramental ledgers, donation logs from parishes long shuttered. I worked by candlelight, alone. And that's where I found it. Tucked between two rotting hymnals was a folder with a name scribbled in faded blue ink. Agnes. Inside were letters. Dozens. All written by her, none ever sent. They were addressed to bishops, to the Vatican, to a sister she referred to only as Constance. And they told a story I hadn't dared to say aloud, not even to myself. In one, dated 3 months before her disappearance, she wrote, "He's using the confessional like a trap. The younger ones don't understand the danger. I tried to warn Clémence. She accused me of envy, said I had grown suspicious in my old age. I fear I will be silenced. But if anyone finds this, know that I was not delusional. He is not a shepherd. He is the wolf." My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the folder. I read every word. Twice. And I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Mother Clémence knew. She'd known all along. She had chosen obedience, not to God, not to truth, but to Father Damien, to silence, to the institution. And if I didn't act soon, I would become just like her, not just a witness to evil, but a participant in it, a coward cloaked in a veil. That night, I didn't sleep. And for the first time since entering St. Aurelia's, I didn't pray either. The confessional used to be a sacred place, a space where we shed our sins, whispered our regrets, and walked away lighter. But after Father Damien arrived, it became something else entirely, a room where shame was manufactured and used like currency, a box of fear. I remember the first time Sister Lucy came out of it pale and shaking. Her veil was slightly crooked, and she didn't speak for the rest of the day. I followed her to the chapel that night and found her kneeling, but not praying, just trembling. I asked her what had happened. She looked at me like I was still a child. "He said I needed cleansing," she whispered, "that I was a danger to the purity of the convent." I didn't understand then. But I would, because a week later it was my turn. Father Damien called me in after Vespers. I obeyed. The candle inside the confessional flickered behind the grill, casting sharp lines across his face. He didn't ask about my sins. He didn't care about what I'd done. Instead, he asked about my thoughts. "Do you ever struggle with obedience, Sister Beatrice?" "No, Father." "Even now, in the silence, alone?" I didn't answer. He leaned forward. "Have you had impure dreams? About anyone here? Another sister, perhaps?" My mouth went dry. "These are not questions of curiosity," he continued. "They are questions of your soul. I am here to guide you." I nodded, even as my stomach turned. And then he assigned me a penance. 3 hours of kneeling in the chapel, in silence, with arms outstretched. "Your posture will reflect your devotion," he said, "and the pain will burn away your disobedience." It was agony. My knees felt like fire. My shoulders trembled. But I didn't cry, not while he was watching. When the candle finally burned low enough that he could no longer see me from the shadows, I collapsed forward and wept. I wasn't alone in these punishments. They became more frequent, more severe. Sister Magdalena was locked in her room for 2 days without food. Sister Therese was forced to recite the Psalms aloud from memory, standing barefoot on stone, for misplacing a rosary. Sister Lucy was made to scrub the entire chapel floor with a toothbrush. She worked until her fingers bled. We didn't talk about it. Not because we didn't want to, but because by then we had learned the cost of speaking. Confession became theatre, a performance of submission. And Father Damien? He became the director, the warden, the puppeteer cloaked in scripture. One night, I looked around the dining table and realized something horrifying. Every face I saw was a version of me, obedient, quiet, broken. But I still had Sister Helena's journal, and I still remembered Sister Agnes's warnings. We were all being punished, not for sin, but for being women under a man who believed God had made him untouchable. Sister Helena was different from the rest of us. Not louder, not rebellious, but sharp, intentional. Her eyes held a kind of quiet defiance that only those who had survived real darkness could carry. She had once worked in a mission overseas, though she rarely spoke of it. All we knew was that she had come to St. Aurelia's for peace. But I began to wonder if she had actually come for refuge. It was Helena who first told me to stop waiting for someone to save us. She cornered me one afternoon in the laundry cellar. The air was thick with soap and steam, but her voice cut through it like cold steel. "I've seen this before," she said flatly, folding a white sheet with trembling hands. "Different man, same cruelty, same collar." I stared at her, stunned. "Then why are you still here?" "Because I've been watching," she said. "And I'm not the only one." She pulled a small black journal from beneath her sleeve and pressed it into my hands. "Read it. But not here. Not in daylight. And if anyone asks, you never saw this. That night, under the weak glow of my candle, I opened the book. Dates, names, incidents, patterns. Helena had recorded everything. Confessions twisted into interrogations, bruises disguised as accidents, penances assigned for made-up sins. She'd even documented Father Damien's visits with Mother Clemence, visits that happened after curfew, always behind closed doors. Page after page, I saw the web, and we were all caught in it. At the back of the journal, scrawled in red ink, was a note that made my blood run cold. He's building something here, not just control, but a world where he can be God. The church won't stop him. But maybe we can, if we move before he senses the shift. I closed the journal and blew out the candle. But that night, the dark didn't feel safe anymore. Over the next few days, Helena grew more distant, more careful. She avoided eye contact in public, stopped speaking during meals. I wanted to ask what she planned, but I knew better. If Father Damien suspected she was leading a revolt, she wouldn't just be punished. She would be erased. And then one night, the fire came. It started in the east wing, Helena's wing. We heard the screaming before we saw the flames. By the time we reached her room, it was too late. Smoke choked the hallway. Heat cracked the glass. We watched through the gaps in the stone as her window shattered outward and the fire swallowed her room whole. They said it was faulty wiring, but I knew better. Helena had become dangerous, and in St. Aurelia's, dangerous women don't get buried, they get burned. The next morning, Father Damien held Mass in the courtyard, standing tall before the scorched chapel wall. He spoke of sacrifice, of redemption, of purifying flames. And I stood there, clutching her journal beneath my robes. The candle she gave me hadn't burned out. Not yet. The east wing smouldered for 2 days. Smoke curled into the sky like a warning, but no one came. No fire trucks, no investigators, just silence and ash. The official story was that a faulty wire in the wall behind Sister Helena's writing desk sparked in the night. She must have been asleep, they said. Never felt the heat. Burned too quickly to scream. But I'd heard the scream. We all had. And I saw something else too. Something I never told anyone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The storm outside was loud, but my thoughts were louder. I'd been rereading the journal, committing every detail to memory in case it was ever taken. I blew out my candle and was just beginning to settle when I heard footsteps, heavy ones, moving past my door toward the east wing. I crept out of bed, cracked the door, and saw his silhouette. Father Damien, not in robes, in dark slacks, a long coat, carrying something under one arm, a canister. He moved with purpose but not urgency, like he was following steps in a ritual. I didn't follow him. I couldn't. I just stood there and watched him disappear down the hall toward Helena's room. Minutes later, the first glow of orange lit the stained glass windows. Helena didn't stand a chance. They found what was left of her the next morning. Or at least they said they did. The casket was sealed. Closed forever. For the dignity of the remains, they said. A small ceremony was held in the chapel, Father Damien at the altar, face carefully composed. He spoke of loss and divine purpose, of Helena's quiet struggle with despair, a veiled insinuation that her death was her own fault. I looked around at the other sisters. Sister Therese wouldn't stop shaking. Sister Lucy cried so hard, she vomited behind the pew. Sister Magdalena had her hands clenched so tightly around her rosary, her knuckles bled. No one said a word. After the service, I tried to speak with Mother Clements. I asked if Helena had left anything behind, a journal, perhaps, something she might have wanted us to have. Mother Clements's eyes narrowed. Helena was troubled, she said. She filled her head with lies and suspicions. Let her soul rest. She wasn't lying, I whispered. Her voice snapped like a whip. And you will not repeat that. That evening, I returned to the cellar. I buried Helena's journal beneath a loose floorboard beneath the altar relics, wrapping it in oilcloth to protect it. I knew if he ever found it, he'd destroy it, and maybe me along with it. The fire had done more than take Helena's life. It had silenced the one person who dared to confront him. I was alone now. But something had shifted in me, something permanent. The fear was still there, but it had company now. Anger, the kind that doesn't fade, the kind that waits. After Helena's death, the convent changed, not with a scream, but with a hush. A thick, heavy silence fell over St. Aurelia's like a woolen shroud, the kind of silence that doesn't protect, but suffocates. We still sang hymns, we still broke bread, we still scrubbed floors and whispered prayers. But everything felt hollow. Even God seemed quieter. Father Damien resumed his place at the pulpit, his sermons now laced with veiled warnings. He spoke of temptation, of sin festering inside sacred walls, of women who confused their own darkness for divine visions. He never named Helena, but he didn't have to. We all knew. Her death was not an accident. It was a message. Obedience is life. Defiance is flame. I began to disappear into myself. Not outwardly. I still performed my duties, still smiled when addressed. But inside, I was retreating. Building walls where prayers used to live. I had seen too much. I had learned too well. Every sister moved differently now. Sister Therese no longer hummed during chores. Sister Lucy stopped painting icons in the chapel. Sister Magdalena cut her hair short, unbidden, as if trying to erase the part of herself he had stared at too long. The air in the halls thickened. The chapel's beauty turned cold. The garden, once a place of life, became a graveyard of secrets. And yet, despite everything, novices still came. Young women, barely of age, eager to serve God. They were bright-eyed, full of hope, just like I had been, just like Lucy, just like Helena. They walked through the gates believing they were entering heaven on earth. And I watched them, heart pounding, teeth clenched, because I knew what would happen next. I tried gently to warn one of them, a girl named Clara, barely 18. She reminded me of myself, quiet, eager, soft-spoken. I told her to be careful during confession, to never go in alone after dusk. She looked at me with confusion, even pity. Father Damien is kind, she said. He gave me a necklace, said I reminded him of someone he lost. A necklace. It made my skin crawl. A few days later, Clara stopped coming to meals. She claimed to be fasting. A spiritual discipline, she said. Father Damien suggested it. I saw the bruises beneath her sleeves. I wanted to scream, but there was no one left to scream to. Mother Clemence was no longer a mother, only a gatekeeper. The other sisters were too broken to resist. And I was too afraid to be the next flame. So I did the one thing I hated myself for. I stayed quiet. I pressed my lips shut and folded my hands and told myself I was waiting for the right moment. But in truth, I was already buried, sealed in vows I no longer believed in, and drowning in a silence that had swallowed too many of us whole. It began with a storm. The roof above the chapel had always leaked in heavy rain, but this one was worse. Thunder cracking like judgment, water seeping through stone, pooling on the altar. The convent was old, and time had started to show in its bones. After Mass that morning, I was sent to assess the damage. Alone, of course. By then, no one wanted to be alone in that chapel. But I didn't argue. Part of me welcomed the solitude. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed to stop pretending I wasn't unraveling. The rain had exposed a crack near the altar's base, just behind the communion rail. The stone there had shifted, water leaking through the seams. I fetched a crowbar and pried one of the floor panels loose, expecting rot or mould or rats. What I found was a stairwell, narrow, steep, carved into stone. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my mind a tangle of voices, Helena's warnings, Agnes's letters, the words I had swallowed for years. Every instinct told me to seal it back up. But something deeper, something older, told me to go down. I lit a lantern and descended. The steps led to a small stone room, no bigger than a monk's cell. The walls were damp, lined with bookshelves that sagged under the weight of rotting ledgers and dust-caked volumes. But it wasn't the books that stopped me cold. It was the table in the centre of the room, set with wine goblets, empty bottles. A black candle burned halfway down, melted wax hardened into puddles across old parchment. And there, stacked neatly in a wooden box, were items I couldn't mistake. Locks of hair, small silver crucifixes, handwritten confession slips, and photographs, dozens of them. Girls, some I recognized, some I didn't. Young novices, barely out of childhood, their eyes vacant, their hands clasped as if told to pray. Some were smiling, some were not. They were all victims, all of them. There was one of Clara, another of Lucy. Even a blurred image of Sister Helena, her face turned to the side as if caught in motion. In the corner of the room stood a mannequin, draped in ceremonial robes. Not the vestments of a priest, but something darker, older. The colours wrong, the symbols wrong. This was no relic of the church. This was something else, something profane. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My hand clutched the journal beneath my robes like it could shield me from the truth. Father Damien hadn't just been hurting women. He had been documenting it, ritualizing it. This wasn't just sin. It was ceremony. I fled up the stairs, sealed the stone panel, and ran straight to my room. I didn't eat that day. I didn't sleep that night. And for the first time, I realized something truly terrifying. We weren't living in a broken convent. We were trapped in a cathedral built for monsters. They came in a flurry that spring, 5 girls, all under 20, all glowing with the same innocence we had once worn like second skin. Clara was the first. Then came Elise, Marion, Ruth, and Hannah. They were full of questions, full of faith, and every time I looked at them, I felt a scream build inside me. I had already failed Clara once. I couldn't fail the others. But how do you protect someone who doesn't yet believe they're in danger? Father Damien welcomed them like a shepherd greeting new lambs. He gave each one a token, a book of prayers, a ribbon, a medal of St. Cecilia. They were honoured, flattered. They giggled after Mass. I saw Ruth blush when he touched her hand during communion. It was already starting, the same pattern, the same design. I tried to speak to them, subtly at first, cautioning them against long hours alone in the chapel, urging them to take confession in pairs. Elise laughed. "Are you jealous, Sister Beatrice?" she asked with a smirk. He says you used to be his favourite. I nearly choked on the shame. It was clear he'd poisoned their minds already, twisting stories, positioning himself as misunderstood, making me look like the bitter, aging nun with a vendetta. And it worked. Mother Clémence had begun to treat me with contempt in full view. She'd stopped speaking to me unless it was to reprimand. My duties were doubled, my meals shortened. Sometimes I wouldn't be assigned a room at all and was told to sleep in the infirmary. "You're lucky to still be here," she warned me once. "Most convents would have sent you away for your behaviour." Behaviour? That's what they called suspicion now. I clung to Helena's journal like it was a holy relic. I had copied passages onto separate sheets and hidden them in 3 different locations: beneath the altar, inside a loose brick in the garden wall, and inside the spine of an old hymnal. If he found one, the others might still survive. But it wasn't enough. He was escalating. Clara fainted in the courtyard one afternoon. Her lips were pale, her hands shaking. She claimed it was fasting, but I recognized the look. It was the same hollow expression Lucy had worn before she disappeared for a week and returned a ghost of herself. And still, no one would listen. Until one night, Ruth came to me. Quiet, pale, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "Something happened," she whispered. "He said it was necessary, that my soul had darkness." I led her to the cellar, locked the door, and let her cry until the sun came up. She wouldn't tell me everything. But she didn't need to. I had heard it before. I had lived it. And that's when I made the decision. I would not wait for the church. I would not wait for fire. I would not wait for another girl to disappear into silence. The proof I had was real. The pain was real. And if no one else would stop him, then I would. I wrote it in the dark. 2 candles burned low beside me, their light flickering across Helena's journal as I transcribed the truth onto fresh parchment. I chose every word carefully, just as she had. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a record, a reckoning, a final attempt to drag the truth out of the shadows. It was addressed to the Vatican. But it wasn't just for Rome. It was for the bishop who once smiled during our profession of vows, for the priests who looked the other way when girls came back from confession shaking, for the mothers who sent their daughters to holy service and never asked what happened behind the gates. I wrote for Clara, who now barely spoke, for Ruth, whose hands trembled even in prayer, and for Helena, whose bones were likely buried in unmarked earth. Your Holiness, I write not as a nun, but as a witness, as a victim, as a voice for those who can no longer speak. I write of Father Damien, priest of St. Aurelia's Convent, who for over a decade has abused, manipulated, and desecrated not only the bodies of young women, but the sanctity of your church. I have included dates, names, and copies of records found beneath the chapel, records kept by the predator himself. I ask not for mercy, only for truth. For once, let justice reach even those who wear the cloth. I folded the pages, tied them with string, and sealed them in an envelope with wax from the chapel altar. Then I prayed. Not the prayers from the liturgy. Those were hollow now. I prayed my own words, rough-edged and desperate. God, if you are still watching, if you are still here, show me what to do. The next morning, I asked permission to go into town. I claimed we were low on gauze and antiseptic. It wasn't a lie. Ruth had bruises that wouldn't heal. Mother Clémence barely looked up from her desk. "Be quick," she said, "and don't make a habit of wandering." I carried the letter in the folds of my skirt, held tight against my hip like a secret heartbeat. There was a post office near the town square. I stood outside for a long time, watching people pass. Children, men, women with shopping baskets. A world moving on, unaware that up on the hill, girls were being broken in God's name. I stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled, and that's when I saw him. Father Damien, standing at the counter, speaking with the clerk, smiling like the devil in disguise. My blood turned to ice. He hadn't seen me, yet. I turned, walked straight back out. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't send the letter. I couldn't. By nightfall, he would know someone had followed him into town. By morning, Mother Clémence would be watching me again. So I burned the envelope in the garden, tore it page by page, fed it to the flames, watched the words curl into smoke. And still, part of me wondered, had he been following me? Or had God sent him there as a test? That night, Clara's bed was empty, and no one said a word. Clara never came back. The official story was that she'd been called away to care for a dying aunt. A vague letter appeared on Mother Clemence's desk the next day, read aloud with forced cheer. She is grateful for her time here. She sends her blessings. But I had seen the bruises, the silence in her eyes, the tremble in her voice when she spoke Father Damien's name. She didn't leave. She vanished. Just like Helena, just like Agnes, just like the girl before me, whose name no one dared speak anymore. And just like that, the door slammed shut. Mother Clemence no longer spoke to me at all. I was given the most isolated chores, cleaning the far barn, repairing torn cassocks alone in the sacristy. They moved my bed to a storage room. My meals were cold, my chores doubled. And Father Damien? He smiled, wider than ever, like he knew he had won. Every time I passed him in the corridor, he would nod slightly. Sometimes he would say, "Still here, Sister Beatrice?" as though surprised I hadn't broken yet. And the truth was, I had. I no longer felt anger. I no longer even felt fear. I felt hollow. I stopped writing in the journal. I buried the last pages under a loose board in the old cellar, beneath an unused box of altar cloths. I didn't want to carry it anymore. Not with me. Not in me. The nights blurred. The years passed. New sisters came. Some stayed. Some disappeared. The silence swallowed us all. In 1987, Mother Clémence was transferred. She was replaced by a younger woman named Sister Marianne, who smiled too much and asked too few questions. I kept my head down. My name became dust on the lips of others. And then, one day I was old. My hands no longer held the strength to scrub stone floors. My back curved like a dying branch. And I was no longer considered useful. I was sent to St. Bridget's, an old-age home for retired religious in the countryside. It was clean, quiet, sterile. The staff was polite. The priests came once a month to hear confession. I never went. They gave me a new room, a new bed, a new routine, but I never unpacked fully, because inside the lining of my suitcase, hidden beneath layers of fabric and time, was one thing I refused to let go of. Helena's journal, the proof, the truth. And every year, I told myself I would share it. Every year, I didn't. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because I didn't think anyone would care. The world had moved on, and I had stayed behind, buried in the ruins of St. Aurelia's. Until one autumn afternoon, a young woman named Celeste walked into the home with a notepad and a recorder. She was a journalist, researching the convent for an anniversary piece. "St. Aurelia's closed in '99, right?" she asked, smiling. I looked at her for a long time, and something old, something buried, moved in me. No, I said softly. It closed long before that. That night, I opened the journal again for the first time in nearly 30 years, and I knew the silence was over. Celeste came back the next morning, notebook in hand, eyes curious but respectful. She was young, 25 maybe, with a kindness in her that reminded me of Sister Lucy before everything went dark. "I thought you might have something to share," she said, sitting across from me in the little garden behind the home. I studied her for a long moment. "I haven't spoken of this in 40 years, I said. "If I do, there's no turning back." She nodded. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to say." But I was ready. For the first time in decades, I was ready. So I told her. Not all at once, but in slow, careful pieces. I started with the first whisper from Sister Therese, the bruise on Lucy's shoulder, the burning of Helena's room, Agnes's rosary wrapped in blood-stained cloth. I described Father Damien's rituals in the confessional, his control, his punishments disguised as penance. I described the hidden room beneath the chapel, the photographs, the symbols, the table. I watched her face change with each detail, confusion, then horror, then something I hadn't expected, fury. She asked if I had any proof. I reached beneath the blanket draped over my legs and pulled out Helena's journal. I had wrapped it in plain cloth, the edges worn thin, the pages yellowed. But every word was still there, every name, every date, every mark of what had been done. Celeste held it like something sacred. She didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, she asked, "Do you want me to publish this?" The wind rustled the leaves. The autumn air bit at my cheeks. "I want the world to know," I said. "I want the record set straight. I want the names remembered. The real names, not the ones they gave us in the papers, not the lies the church told." She nodded. "I can do that," she said. She came back every day for a week. We recorded everything, the whole story, from the first penance to the last disappearance, from the vow I took as a girl to the silence I wore as a woman. I told her the names: Helena, Agnes, Lucy, Clara, Ruth, Joy, Magdalena. I told her the sins they carried that were never theirs to bear. And when we were done, she pressed stop on the recorder, looked me in the eye, and said, "This will not be buried." For the first time in 4 decades, I slept through the night. No dreams. No waking with a scream caught in my throat. Just silence. Real silence. The kind that comes after truth. The kind that doesn't suffocate, but sets you free. The story broke 3 weeks later. Celeste's article wasn't just a piece. It was a reckoning. A front-page exposé in the state's largest paper, followed by a 2-part radio segment and an hour-long television interview. She hadn't softened anything. She hadn't changed our names. She hadn't hidden the horror. And most importantly, she hadn't let the church spin it first. The title read, "The Silent Sins of St. Aurelia's, a Nun's 40-Year Secret." My photograph was there, old, wrinkled, hair tied back in a thin braid, but my eyes were clear. I made sure of that. Within days, the fallout began. The diocese issued a statement calling the story deeply troubling and promising a full internal review. 2 days later, a second woman came forward, an anonymous letter from a former novice who had left the convent in 1985, citing inappropriate pastoral relationships. Then another, and another. former sisters, former parish girls, a former altar boy. They had been waiting, all of them, waiting for someone else to break the silence first. Celeste called me every day with updates. Her voice shook with disbelief. "It's bigger than we thought, Sister Beatrice. He didn't stop when the convent closed. He just moved the sickness elsewhere." Father Damien, now Monsignor Damien, had retired 5 years earlier, quietly, after suffering a minor stroke. He was living in a private home paid for by the church. His name still hung in the vestibule of 2 parish buildings. A scholarship fund bore his name. That changed quickly. By the end of the month, an independent investigation had been launched. Celeste gave them everything: my testimony, the journal, even photos she'd taken of the hidden cellar beneath the chapel, long since sealed but still traceable in the original blueprints. I watched it all from my small room in St. Bridget's, the television flickering with headlines, reporters outside, letters arriving from all over the country, some full of thanks, others full of rage, a few dripping with venom, accusing me of slandering a man of God. But none of it shook me, because I had already lived through worse, and I was no longer alone. 2 months later, a letter came from the Vatican, hand-signed, formal, an apology. They used words like failure, complicity, and systemic breakdown, words they never used before. It didn't undo anything. It didn't bring Helena back, or Agnes, or Lucy. But it mattered. It mattered because the church, for once, had been forced to name what it tried to bury. Father Damien died before the canonical trial began. His body was found in his home, alone. A quiet death, the kind he denied so many others. He never confessed. But I didn't need him to. The truth had already spoken, and it had spoken loud enough to wake the world. Now, every year, on the anniversary of the story's release, I sit in the garden and light 7 candles, one for each sister whose life he tried to erase, and an 8th for the girl I once was, the one who entered the convent at 16, full of devotion and faith, not knowing she would one day stand in fire and come out naming names. My name is Sister Beatrice, and this time you will remember it.